All right. Good morning, world. Hope everybody woke up alive with me again today. On this frickin' tsunami day. Another one. I think it's been 3 days straight of unbelievable rain. Holy. I think got a couple left. And of course, tomorrow we have to process 90 chickens outside. I think that's probably 2 or 3 times in a row, years in a row, it's been pouring rain while having to do that. Whatever. That's all I got to complain about, right? Now, first, I'm going to have one little rant. It's not a bad one. It's kind of funny, for a change. I've never been an official dog owner, ever. I've never had my own dog, ever. I've had a lot of animals in my life. Like, I've had a lot of other people's dogs in my life, whether it be guide camp or friends, or girlfriends, or whatever. And I don't know why, but animals have always gravitated towards me. Doesn't matter what species. They just have horses, dogs, people. Oh, my dog hates men. Not me. Trust me, it's going to be fine. Never. But anyway, one thing that's kind of taking me back right now, being a first-time dog owner, I didn't realize how they react with that bond. I guess it always amazes me. I mean, this dog, if everybody in the house, dinner time, she has to sit down on the floor beside me. If she's in the house, bedtime, she has to lay down on the side of the bed where I am. Get up in the morning, have coffee, she follows me into the living room and sits right frickin' beside me. I get up to go to the bathroom, she has to follow me to the bathroom. And everybody's in the house. I get up to go to the kitchen, and she'll be knocked right out, passed out of sleep. She'll get up, walk in the kitchen, stand there with me, and then walk back and lay down again when I sit down. It's such a weird thing to observe, never having a dog before, right? And then, anyways, the funny part is yesterday, we had to go on a bit of a road trip, couple-hour drive to drop off some stuff I had in here at my friend's place, and we took her with us, and she's in the back seat. And every time I glance back, all I see is this window licker looking at me. That look on her face right there. Every time I look, she's not looking out the window. She's not looking out the windshield. She's looking at me. You know, everywhere I go, I look at her and she just looks at me like this. She's got this funny, goofy ass dog grin, big wide pupils and eyeballs with this shit-eating window licker look on her face looking at me. And it made me laugh. Every time I'm like driving along, look at her. You know, and all I'm seeing is that staring back at me. It's so funny. Crazy, isn't it? The bond between an animal and a human being, or a dog and a human being, and other animals. It's something else. Tell you what. There you go. How's that for an opener rant for a happy Sunday morning? Now let's get into hearing some people speak, all right? All right, Western Pennsylvania, Central Oregon is the title of this email. Hello, Steve. I have a couple of things I'd like to share with you and the people. First off, thank you for this platform and all of your others. The shit you have seen and dealt with being a guide is crazy, to say the least. I started watching your hunting stories many years ago now. And now here we all are. It's amazing. I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, and now I reside in Central Oregon. I grew up in the country, helping my buddy on his grandfather's farm. We were 10 years old, chucking bales of hay onto the flatbed and stacking it. 70 pounds dry and heavy as hell damp. No doubt. I did anything to get out of the house, and I loved working hard. I hunted, trapped, and camped every chance I had. In Pennsylvania, you can start hunting at age 12, but you're supposed to be within seeing distance of an adult. That was never the case, lol. I was dropped off or walked in by myself a couple hours before daybreak. It was always spooky for me. At 11, At 1, I couldn't see shit. Oh, sorry, number 1, I couldn't see shit. Number 2, I didn't have a good light, just a general direction. That brings me to what I saw while driving home with my mom. I was 10 or 11 when we were driving home. I was in the passenger seat of the car. I always liked looking out the window at the fields and the farms. I enjoy nature. It's peaceful to me and it's free therapy. All the backcountry roads are about the same, a few houses with farms and power lines. While gazing out of the window, I noticed a large creature running on all fours, and I was baffled at what I was seeing. It wasn't fitting in with any of the animals or wildlife that I knew. What popped into my head was a rhino. It was very big and had long, light to medium gray hair, and I could see its muscles. It went from tree line to tree line in seconds, but it was like it was in slow motion as I was locked on it. I remember its face protruding a little bit. It wasn't a typical Sasquatch face, nor how people described a dog man. No hair around its face, or very little, because its skin was grayish color as well. It disappeared after going into the woods. I never said anything to my mother. Not that I was afraid to, I was trying to figure out what I had just saw. I didn't say anything to anyone about that until 5 years ago. There was some dark timber back home, and I sometimes got the feeling to get out, so I did. I never did see another one back home. Can you hear that rain? Man. These next two that stuck with me happened here in Oregon. One was around the Fort Rock area while bow hunting mule deer. My buddy had a spot that he hunted during rifle season and always tagged one, so we went to his spot. It was by a guzzler, and I was pumped until we got 1/3 of the way into the woods, and out of nowhere, we heard a deep guttural howl. To me, sounded like a wolf, followed up by coyote noises. It was a bit off, and the butthole pucker factor was in effect, especially hearing how close they all were, and all we had was my bow and a can of bear spray. Seasoning. It lasted a few minutes while we both stopped in our tracks, listening to what was going on, and if they were, excuse me, and if they're going to head our way. Neither of us could see shit, being that it was a good 2-ish hours to daybreak, and we still had a little ways to get to the guzzler. A guzzler is like a water source for the elk, for those who don't know. As fast as it happened, it stopped. We got to our spot and set up, waiting for daylight. We spent a couple of hours there, what seemed to be completely silent and seeing nothing, when we heard another sound. To me, it sounded like a large boulder hitting a ponderosa. That seemed impossible to me, being that we were on flat ground at a dead-end road and a decent hike in. It was so quiet, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. I told this story to my buddy, and he said he had heard a noise like a log hitting a large tree while hunting Company Butte, followed by silence the entire morning and a weird feeling, so he beat feet to his rig and took off. I don't think he was scared, he just couldn't figure out why and what. Where he was hunting and myself as a crow flies is several miles, not too far. My third experience with my buddy that hunted Company Butte. We were at Davis Lake camping. We had a nice fire going and our bellies were full, bullshitting around the fire. I noticed a blue light, an orb, LOL, coming from the middle of the lake heading towards shore. I pointed out to my buddy, hoping he saw the same thing, and he confirmed it. At first we thought a boat, but it was moving at a steady pace with no up and down, side-to-side motion. Just a steady, light blue ball of light. It disappeared about 59 yards or so, guessing onto shore. We wrote it off as something weird and hit the rack soon after. I never said anything to him or any of my friends about what happened that night. I was car camping in my 3/4-ton Suburban with my pup. I had a very real and vivid dream that night. It was like I was watching from above at 5 Sasquatch in staggered formation creeping through our camp. The dream had everything in it. The trees, the boulders, the manzanita, everything was exact. It was like they were hunting. They all ranged in size, not giant 12-foot, but 8 to 10 foot, different builds, but all were a medium brown with a leathery brown face. They were all close, but one of them looked into my side window, and that's when I woke up feeling a bit rattled and wondering what was going on. I felt like a helpless child, afraid to move, but ready to let the slugs rip if needed, but nothing. And needless to say, no strange noises, and definitely no sleep after that. I don't know what I saw, heard, or dreamt, but I know I saw, heard, and experienced it. I'm always going on solo camping and fishing trips, picking mushrooms, and getting my dose of therapy. I still experience things in some spots, but, excuse me, not all the time. When I get the feeling to beat feet out of there, I do. Thanks for everything you're doing, Steve, and I'm not sharing this to bullshit anyone. I have nothing to gain or lose. And thank all of you people that shared your real experiences. Excuse me. Do I ever want to see one again? Hell no. Stay safe up there, Steve. Respectfully, Joe. Leave this out, please. Give it a second. Got you, man. Appreciate that. Appreciate the ending. Appreciate your whole email. Your honesty. Being brave. You're a kick-ass dude. And I can relate to your last message to me. Only a different name brand on the back of those jackets. When I was younger, for sure. Now, good for you though, man. Looking right on. You're a strong, strong man. Welcome aboard. We love having you in the club. Now, what's this one? Mark this as red. Dogs vs. Watchers. Title this email. It's up to you whether or not you believe this. It always is, my friend. It always is. That's the beauty of this place. I've been sitting up in a tree 10 feet in the air in a rope hammock I put up between 9 and 10 a.m. that day. I sat there hunting for deer. I sat there deer hunting from the time I put up to about an hour and a half before dark. I saw nothing but squirrels and little songbirds all day. Come to the time where it was roughly an hour and a half before dark, the squirrels and songbirds all disappeared. And at about 150 yards away, I hear yips and yaps and growls with syllables. What I call canine talk. Nothing in sight due to a rolling hill in a low area. So I sit up and watch intently, expecting a couple of coyotes were going to come out. And as I watched intently, a pair of black, tall, lanky forest people come into view, still speaking canine, and not noticing me up in the cedars watching them. And as they stop within 120 yards roughly, one goes off to the other one's right, while the other one comes walking straight in my direction. Ooh. As the one coming straight towards me closes to about 75 yards, I say in my head, I think it, I see you. Instantly locks my position, and for about a split second, looks at me, then barrel asses runs for cover. Finds a bush to hide behind, and that was the end of the sighting. Just gone. So, in reference to dogs, on more than one occasion I have either seen or heard them speak canine talk. Couple that with mind speak telepathy, and there you go. No idea what they say to your dog, and there's your fear response. P.S. I've not only heard two of my dogs look at each other and speak in syllables of growls, but I caught once my cat and dog talk in the same manner while looking at each other and out the back glass door. Except the cat had syllable meows, both looking at each other and then out the door. Communication is far more than we know for sure. I believe it. I believe the communication is far more than we know for sure as well. And if we could communicate smoothly in these odd fashions like they're learning about, wouldn't that throw the controllers for a loop, right? Wouldn't that throw it for a loop? Very interesting. Very scary potentially too, right? There you go. Like you said, take from what you will or leave it. You came forward. Appreciate your time, man. Another member of the club. Here's another one titled My Experiences. Hi, Steve. You're welcome to use my name. Sorry. If you want. This will be very long. And yet not all inclusive of my experiences. Oh. My name is Mike Sweeney. I'm 72 years old and retired. I've lived in Minnesota all my life. I'm an avid hunter since I was a kid. whitetails, black bear, upland game. I'm so glad I found your channel. It's made my life much easier to deal with by hearing the experiences of others. I've watched Blightus for years. The missing persons situation is of great interest to me and very concerning. I've seen every video. I appreciate his Sasquatch background and focuses on missing, which is admirable. Now I'm hooked on your channel because of the subject matter, which is near and dear to me, and I appreciate you telling it like it is. We are very similar in that way. We could probably be buddies. Leaving nothing unsaid and tell it like it is. Appreciate the kind words, my man. Here we go. 40 years ago, I purchased 20 acres of forest land in with a section of beaver ponds, surrounded by thousands of acres of state and county timberland in north central Minnesota. I moved an old trailer house onto the property to hunt out of. My son and I have since built 2 nice cabins for our families. This is a completely off-grid except some phone and text if I'm lucky. A little background on me. Excuse me. I've had experiences my entire life, even as a child, that are defined as paranormal. My career background is carpentry first, followed by law enforcement as a deputy sheriff. I have been described by a trauma debriefer as hyper-vigilant and extremely observant. My hunting group back then was a group of 8 friends. I'm the only one left, with my son. He too has had some pretty bizarre experiences up there, as has my wife. For the purposes of this discussion, space and time, I will include only experiences that have occurred on or near my property. These experiences are spread out over years. They do not happen every time I'm there. I'm almost always alone when they happen, unfortunately, although my wife has witnessed them with me on a few occasions. Of the 20 acres, we have approximately 1.5 acres cleared yard, 2 cabins, and older trailer houses in a triangle configuration, each about 85 feet apart. My experiences started right after I bought the property. Back then I had no real knowledge of Sasquatch, so things would happen, as you will see, that might be this or might be that, but just didn't fit any one thing. So we would be left with blaming a bear or some other animal because we had nothing else to attribute it to. But it just didn't fit. And as you will see, I feel I am targeted. It is personal. Having said that, other than being startled, surprised, I haven't felt threatened, but I have felt like the intent is to scare me away. So far that hasn't worked. I'm still there, and I go where I please. I'm very near many parcels of reservation land. I have known many natives and native elders. One once told me, quote, "The entire area is a moving portal. They are everywhere," end quote. I said, "The portals are Sasquatch." And he smiled and said, "Yes." And then he walked away. I'll swear to the truth of what I say here, and I'll get to it now. For bear hunting, Minnesota is a baiting state. I would sample bait, scout the area I want to hunt, fill a burlap sack with bait, attach a hefty rope, throw it over a horizontal tree limb, 7 feet or high or so, to see if it would be reached and torn open. Then I knew it was a large black bear to reach it. 1990, I believe. I was baiting, and limbs and bait bags were being demolished, and I felt uneasy about it. I felt it was beyond a black bear's ability. I found an 18-inch diameter healthy oak tree with a horizontal limb 9 feet plus high and over a trail. I loaded the bag, hoisted it up, and left. The next day I returned, and as I went down the trail, I couldn't believe my eyes. Not only was the bag torn to pieces, but the limb was broken off the tree. And the tree was broken off at the ground. The tree had 0 rot. Perfectly healthy. And I said out loud, "What the F?" I hunted that specific location many times for deer and bear, and whatever it was, at the time, it continued to dine on my offerings, and I never saw it. I also didn't see bear scat in that immediate area, and no bait was left behind. That'd be alarming for me right there. Just that one mention. That'd be like, huh? And I couldn't pick up a trail. And yes, as you know, bears do shit in the woods. All over, and near where they eat. Bingo! They leave scraps, and those scraps become maggot covered in warm, humid weather given a direction of travel. Not to be outdone, I decided to change tactics, and instead of hunting typically in the afternoon and evening, as I had been doing and seeing nothing, and the bait disappearing, I decided to hunt like deer season and go out at 4 a.m. and catch it coming off the bait. It was late September, and in Minnesota, the days are warm, leaves are mostly down, extremely dry. If a twig or acorn fell, you'd hear it in the leaves. Very near the bait site, was a fortress of a stand we had built a few years before for deer hunting. It was an old-growth virgin white oak tree, at least 4 feet in diameter. I got to the tree at 4 a.m. The several hundred-yard walk to it annoyed me because of the noise I made in the leaves. I'm trained how to walk in that environment, but that was to not be detected by men, not necessarily animals. I got into the tree and got settled. My pack leaned against the tree. My duty streamlight leaned against my pack. My rifle hung from a hook for that purpose. Off in the distance, I'd hear the occasional leaves crunch from a squirrel looking for acorns, and suddenly, loud, thudding, heavy, slow, crashing steps right near the tree. I could feel it. My thoughts spin. It's a human. Bipedal. Was all I could instantly think. Wondering why I didn't hear them approaching. A long way off, I lost that thought quickly because of the deep, guttural, growling, panting sound. Then, like a bulldozer crashing into the tree, I was knocked off balance. My pack tipping over and my flashlight tipping over. The tree shook. The panting continued. Hearing 4 more steps, I grabbed my streamlight and I lit up the area to see what it was. Nothing. It was silent. No panting, no leaves crunching, no eye shine, no odor, nothing. Because the virgin timber, underbrush was minimal, and my light could see a long way. I looked 360 degrees for 20 minutes as it began to get light, and saw or heard nothing. This was not the panting of a bear that I'm very familiar with. That was the end of bear hunting that year for me. And oddly though, being extremely well trained in tactical assaults, I didn't even think to grab my rifle or draw my handgun. And that has bothered me still today. What if it had come up the tree? Beat it with my flashlight? It's like my ability to act offensively was on pause. Been there. It wasn't fear, because fear is one thing that triggers me into action. Excuse me. I had heard the guttural panting right under the tree. I turned my light on, and it stopped as the light came on. I was looking down around the tree. There was nothing there, and nothing retreating. No, I do not, and never have, slept in a stand while hunting anything. If I want to sleep, I'll stay comfortably in bed instead of out in the rain, snow, and cold, mosquitoes, or heat. The very few people I told, years later, blew it off as I fell asleep and I was dreaming. Not a chance. I can barely sleep when I'm in bed. I've seen several times a mature black bear climb a tree. A 400 or 500-pound bear can climb 30 feet and higher into a tree in 2 seconds or less. It's unbelievable. As you well know, a blur. So, sleep in a stand when bear hunting in bear country over a bait? That dog don't hunt. When my son was a child, I'd build stands to hold both of us safely so he could see what hunting was like. When my son was old enough to hunt with me, we hunted a few years together. Then he abruptly stopped. The problem was, he would never tell me why. Once he told me it's the wolves. I asked if he had seen one, and he said no. I said, you know, they want nothing to do with humans. And if one becomes aggressive, you are carrying a high-power rifle. Do what you need to do. Do what you need to do, and we'll deal with it afterwards. And still he wouldn't hunt. I would question him why he wouldn't talk about it, so I left him alone. He had his reasons. We had talks about strange events by then, so I told him about my experience in that tree. My son looked like he was going to be sick. I asked if that story bothered him, and he said, Dad, that's why I stopped hunting. That exact thing happened to me. Only it was in a stand on this side of the river by the West Trail. He said he was so scared he couldn't talk about it for all these years. In the stand he was in, I was in one where I could just see glimpses of his blaze orange. I never wanted him too far away from me out there. I felt bad he didn't call out for me. He was too scared and didn't want anything to happen to me because he knew I'd come running. And oddly, nothing unusual happened to me there, being that close to him. Now, 2 identical incidents in that general area. The year after that, I was with my hunting group. My best friend at the time, Bob, had bought 10 acres, which was 10 acres west of my 20. We were staying at his place bear hunting. 3 of us had permits. One night about 2 a.m., I woke to nearby gunshots. Bob's son got up. We grabbed long guns and headed down the road. We saw 2 guys bent over on the tree line. I figured they poached a deer and were either going to throw it into the van or got it right there. There's a whole story here, but to be brief, yes, they poached a deer there, and I quickly scared them off. And the rest of my group come to the end of the driveway hearing the shots, and we hung out there until morning. I knew 2 conservation enforcement officers in the area. I went to see the closest one, and he asked, "Is the deer still there?" "Yes." "Have you disturbed it?" "No." "Stay with it, and a forensic team will be there to look at it. Based on the location, it is most likely related to a case we are working on." We did that, and they arrived. They removed the skull cap and retrieved the bullet. They asked what we were doing there. "Bear hunting." They asked if we wanted the carcass. Said yes. That was unheard of, but they gave us a permit. The venison by that time was no longer edible for human consumption due to heat. I gave a description of the van, and later that day they found it and made 2 arrests in a sting they were working for black market venison and poaching. All right. We took the deer out to the river to a spot off the trail and a couple 100 yards into the woods. Bob was an old-timer, pioneer kind of guy. I always told him he was born 200 years too late. Yeah, me too. He brought a spool of baling wire along. There were 8 of us. We held the carcass vertical against a tree. My friend wound the wire around the tree and the tree in spirals. He was a very big man, and it was wrapped tightly twice around the tree in spirals. We wanted a bear to have to eat the deer there on the tree and stay nearby. No one else at the time hunted those woods. This was way off trail. That deer was tight to the tree, and you couldn't get your fingers between the deer and the wire in any spiral. The next day, I get out there to hunt. No deer. Gone. The wire was in pieces around the tree. No cut marks. It was broken in pieces. There were no tracks. Wire pieces were tightly bent onto themselves. I couldn't straighten the bends. Again, what the F? I stood and looked around. This is on a ridge. My gut was telling me a bear could not just break this wire many times with sheer force, with no thumbs. But what else could it be? I figured if it was a bear, it would have dragged it further into the woods and not back toward the trail. But there were no drag marks anywhere. I couldn't pick up a trail. I slowly switched back down from the ridge where there is a stream that goes into the river. I sat on the ridge side and surveyed the area while thinking. Then I saw something unusual. I walked over, and there are 4 hooves sticking out of the ground about 10 inches to the second leg joint. I thought, the son of a bitch buried the deer. And then it hit me. Except for the hooves sticking out of the ground, there's no evidence of digging. I mean, animals digging through leaves and soil everywhere. This was a large, deep hole. There was none of that. I just happened to see the hooves. Had it been typical of an animal digging a hole for the size of a deer, I would have seen that a long way off. Black dirt piled on dry, colorful leaves, very obvious. Where's the dirt that was removed? I looked all over. What the F? I went back, got the crew. We exhumed the deer. You could see the wire indentations, but no evidence of predation or anything that wasn't already there. We left the blame on a bear, but none of us was confident with that. We left the carcass for nature, or whatever, and didn't talk about it again, and no one hunted there. That's creepy. The back corner of my property is a beaver pond, and I don't like it. It's beautiful, great for wildlife, but my timber's disappearing, and the water gets closer and closer. If I wanted lakeshore, I would have bought some. In the early 90s, a friend and my son were up there with me. We walked out onto the dam and decided to tear into it, to drain or at least lower the pond, and perhaps drive the beavers to another area. I knew it would be a battle, and that they would rebuild what we would tear out, but if we could make a big enough dent each day, maybe we just may win. We had a huge waterfall going, and it was self-eroding at the end of day 1. Day 2, we walk out there. The dam was repaired. But there was a line of what I would describe as spears sticking up out of the dam about 2 to 3 feet high. From one side of the dam, from one side to the other of the dam, about 9 feet. Like a short picket fence. The points were sharpened, yet no wood chips in sight, like they were made with an axe somewhere else. Weird. We had to credit the beavers. Except, how did they pound them into the wooden dam and not impale their tails or feet? The 3 of us together could not pull them out. With tools, trying to dig the limbs out of the dam was almost impossible. So how could a beaver get them in so tightly? Something with intelligence was saying, keep out. Those spears were less than 100 feet from my back property line. And years later, my son and his friends were up there out of the river modifying a dam to cross with ATVs. They crossed, and hours later when they returned, same thing. Spears sticking out across the dam. Holy shit. That's bizarre. I built an outhouse in the 80s. I had worked as a carpenter early on and enjoyed it. I'm known for overbuilding things. I'd replaced the back garage door at home and used the other wooden door that had a window on the outhouse. I'd also built 2 deer feeders in the yard. One was a gable roof, the other flat. The outhouse and feeders were framed with 2x4, 4x4, and covered with 5-inch plywood, 5/8-inch plywood, and fastened with construction screws. Sorry, you guys. Very solid. One day I arrived there, and as I slowly drove into the yard, I noticed the feeder with the flat roof had no roof. I got out of my truck to walk over there while scanning the yard, and then I see the outhouse is open. I had bear hunted and had leftover boxes of bulk candy and cookies and molasses. I went there first. It was a panel door with mortised hinges. The vertical board with the hinges, called the stile, was still attached to the outhouse. The rest of the door was pulled apart from the stile, exposing the dowels and dowel joints, and was laying on the ground. The window was out of the door but not broken. The door had been padlocked to the outhouse, and the lock hasp was pulled off of the outhouse, screws still in the screw holes. Nothing was broken. The outhouse was empty. The road is gated and locked and had not been disturbed. I walked over to the feeder. The top was a 4x4 piece of plywood screwed on and flush with the frame. No overlap to grab onto. Yet, it was pulled off, leaving the screws in the plywood. If you used a tool to tear it off, there would have been have to be a hammer and a pry bar. No damage or tool marks were there. I put all my scrap food onto the roof when I leave for whatever wants it. I stopped feeding the deer when CWD hit. And as I stood in the yard with my as usual question up there, what the F, I saw something on the small trail opening into the woods next to the outhouse. All the bear bait boxes were strewn around a small area and all empty. Even some tools, a large kitchen knife, a hand pruner, a limb pruner, and several gloves. I walked around picking up the trash and it hit me again. No scat, no remaining scraps, no teeth marks in the cardboard boxes, boxes not shredded, not in the woods where the bait was eaten, and not in the yard. I took a closer look at the door and the feeder roof. No bite marks, no claw marks, no tool marks. And why would a bear take the tools out into the trees? To this day, I have no idea how those materials were removed and leaving no real damage. It was more accurately disassembled. I actually could have just reassembled the feeder and the door. I had to imagine a big smart bear, but that just didn't explain it. And this was in the mid-90s. My son does the snow removal, and I do all the grass and brush cutting. 3 years ago, while he was blowing snow, he kept seeing what he called a large jet black dog with red eyes on the yard perimeter. He'd seen it here. He'd see it here, look away, and then over there, look away, and then over there, watching him plow. He said it didn't run from place to place, it just appeared somewhere else, though he didn't see it disappear and reappear, but it didn't have time to get from one place to another without him having seen it running, yet he didn't. I asked, was there more than one? He said he never saw more than one, and this went on for hours. It never approached him. Not docile, not aggressive, he didn't feel threatened. I said, are you sure it was a dog and not a wolf? And he wasn't sure. He never saw it again. Then last year, 2023, when he arrived, he pulled in and got out to lock the gates behind him at night, and it was dark. In front of his truck, in the headlights, he saw a white, upright, oval blob thing, like a tic-tac, vertical, about 3 feet high, no features, glide across the road just above the surface and keep going into the trees. Oddly, I saw what he described 25 years ago, crossing the trail 1.5 miles out on the old trail. I'd gotten off my ATV to follow it into the forest, but because I was alone, up there as usual, I thought I wouldn't be prudent as it was dusk. I did look for tracks in the mud where it crossed, but there were none. Then also last year, while he plowed, he saw an old man in a fur hat, buckskin coat, buckskin boots with a musket. The old man stopped, looked at him in the eyes, but my son couldn't see his eyes. It was just a dark area where his eyes should have been. They were close enough to speak, but he didn't. Then the man looked away, walked off, and disappeared. Not disappeared from sight, as in distance, he just faded away. I asked, did he leave tracks in the snow? And he said, no, he didn't. And my son doesn't bullshit me. We have a pact about that. The man had no blaze orange on, which is required during all game hunting seasons in Minnesota. And if he were human, he was trespassing and well into my property and aware we were there. That's frickin' bizarre. Rifle deer hunting in Minnesota runs from the first weekend in November, coinciding with the whitetail rut, through the third weekend. My experience was November 14th, 15th, 16th, 2011. I went to my property to hunt. I was alone and planned to have a relaxing few days hunting on my property, not on the state land. But for over 24 hours, I was unnerved by a series of events, a feeling that I'm not familiar with, the strangest hours of my life to date. It was Friday night. I was in the trailer house in bed sleeping. I'm a light sleeper and I sleep with one eye open. I was awakened at exactly 3 a.m. by a whistle, directly outside, opposite where my head was in bed, which is ultimately 5 feet off the ground. The trailer is on block footings, plus my bed height from the ground. It was not a bird. What or who knows? My head is right there. I sat up instantly, wide awake. Then it repeated. It was pretty similar, but not exactly like a wolf whistle a man would do when seeing a woman. It was long and drawn out. Both times were the same. The only bird that makes noise in the night up there is an owl and a geese. And this is no owl. And I sat there listening. The trailer house is 1962, 12 foot by 55 foot, walls about 3 inches thick at best, and little if any insulation left. My property sits in the middle of a 2-mile stretch of only seasonal hunting properties, all off-grid. And past that, there are just farms, excluding mine, Only 4 cabins or trailer houses in the 2-mile stretch. When I go up alone, I drive that 2-mile stretch to see who is there while I am there. No one else was there. I do have a reputation up there based on my background and how long I've been there, so while I sat there, I kept telling myself no one in their right mind would walk down my driveway 300 feet at 3 a.m. and F with me. That would be very dangerous for them. No clue what to think. I was planning to get up at 4 a.m. and go out to hunt, but at that point I reconsidered. I never heard any footsteps approach or walk away, or any other noises, and I thought, get up and quietly go to the kitchen, lights off, make coffee, and just sit and listen. And as it gets light, go out and hunt. Not knowing what it was, who it was, or why, I was a bit concerned. In my past work, my life, I think it meant work life, I've been threatened by several different groups of violent people at different times, so that is always in the back of my mind even today. Many of those evildoers who actually had sentences that had an end date are getting released now. I quietly made coffee and sat. You hear that ring? Sorry. Where I sat, I was looking straight out of a window, and there was a window immediately to my left. My rifle at my side in case a deer walked through the yard. Wink. The trailer sits at the north end of the yard. So, 80 feet to the south tree line of the yard that I was facing, looking at the woods, and then pond. The timber is 60 years old, give or take, so underbrush was then 67 feet tall. I know when it was last logged and who logged it. It's November, so leaves are all down. The south of the property past the back tree line, as I said, is beaver pond, so no timber, all open. There is beginning to be some light. The timber is all dark between me and the pond, so the pond is backlighting the timber where I can see through. From the edge of the tree line to the siding is roughly 45 feet, so from my seat to the pond is roughly 130 feet max. Not a guess, I measured it. At the point I can see into the trees by then, the pond is well lit, but the sun is not up yet. There's a semi-clear area from beaver damage straight in my line of sight that was well lit, and I could see in and through there. There are 3 large aspens 15 feet apart. I can see between them clearly and over the underbrush pretty well there. I see movement, which puts me on alert. I see something. It's bipedal. No blaze orange, no cap, no discernible clothing, no color differentiations in the face, head and shoulder colors. It's all the same. It appears to be sideways to me, and I'm seeing just the profile. It moves from the west aspen to the middle aspen. In that time, I'm absolutely certain it's not a deer, a bear, or a human. The head was strangely slanted, and there didn't appear to be a neck. I couldn't see arms or legs. Then it passed from the middle aspen to the east aspen, seemingly brushing the top of its head on a large limb, but not ducking or moving off course, as there was no light between the limb and its head. From there, I could no longer see it, as it was too dark in the woods and no longer in line with the pond backlighting, heading in the direction of my stand. Well, I'm pretty much DEFCON 5, straining my brain. Total vision, about 5 seconds. Total visual, about 5 seconds. It best resembled Harvey Pratt's sketch in Tribal Bigfoot, page 311, from Marlette Jackson. If you draw a line from a midpoint between the elbow and the bottom of the deltoid in that sketch to the head, that's what I could see. Even though lighting wasn't ideal, and I was not right on top of this thing, the backlighting made it abundantly clear what it was not. As always, I grabbed my pen and notebook, all the same color, matching exactly the trees and the brush color, no visible clothing, certainly not blaze orange as required. It was very cold, and no hat. Since this sighting was only a couple hours since my rude awakening, I'm assuming what I heard whistle was what I just saw. The head was not human head shape. From where I was, I couldn't see a nose in the profile. The front of the head angled back, and the head appeared to be somewhat conical. The back of the head seemed to go straight down to where the neck should have been. Again, I didn't see a distinct neck. I know every inch of my property. It was on a deer trail with lots of underbrush to fight while walking. I walk it frequently. It's difficult to walk, to say the least. I did not see arms or shoulders as it was sideways to me, and its head did not move up or down or back and forth. It appeared to glide through brush effortlessly. Said everybody. But there's just no way to move through there like that smoothly. You have to fight under brush and downed timber. Arms and shoulders and head should have been flailing and body twisting and turning. Uncharacteristic for me, I decided to wait until late morning to hunt. It was a clear sunny day in the 30s. At 10 a.m., I jocked up and went out. Code red, hyper vigilant, got into my stand. I deer hunt by stalking or with deer calls, and I'm very successful calling deer into me. And from my stand, there is an opening with little underbrush, roughly a quarter acre of openness, about 75 feet from me and on the edge of the pond and on the neighbor's property. I concentrate on that opening because I can see in there very clearly. It happens to be on my neighbor's property, but I know I can call any deer, so I see there onto my, but I know I can call any deer I see there onto my property, and the neighbor does not hunt, and we're friendly. I scan all around as well, of course, head on a swivel. I was using a doe bleat, fawn bleat, and a grunt call. When I get bored in the stand, I'll sometimes go nuts in the calls like a deer herd on crack, and that actually draws deer, so I did that. I didn't hear any movement in the leaves, but suddenly I hear intense, very loud deer snort, then wheeze begin. I've heard these many times before, as it's a warning vocalization, an alert, as you know. However, I've never heard one that intense, and certainly not that loud, but it didn't stop there. This snort, then wheeze. This snort, then wheeze, with no break, morphed into the most blood-curdling woman's scream straight out of a horror movie. I could literally feel the sound waves in my face as if it were directed at me, like a sound cannon at an international airport that scares birds. The volume was intense. The hair on my neck stood up, and I could feel goosebumps on my arms. Then it did it again, identical. I was straining so hard to see because what I could hear, I could see precisely where it was coming from, but there was nothing there. It's open there, no obstructions. I couldn't reconcile this. I should be able to see that source because I know I'm looking at it. Both times while it was in progress, my eyes were zeroed in on the exact spot the sounds, and nothing was there or anywhere in the vicinity. That scream had me completely unnerved. Over 60 years in the bush, and I've never heard anything like it before or since, that all of a sudden, not gradually, suddenly it got dark. Really, really dark. Like a summertime severe thunderstorm dark. That does not happen here in winter. It just doesn't. It started to snow like it was Armageddon. I could not see anything. Wet, heavy snow. It was so hard I cradled my rifle to keep snow off my scope and out of my face. Buried my head and my arms on the railing, and I prayed. I actually thought this was something biblical. In roughly 5 minutes, over 4 inches fell. As quickly as it started, it stopped. Instantly. And the sun was out like nothing happened. I looked up to see the back end of the storm, and there was nothing in the sky except sunny, clear blue sky like before it began. What the actual F? Whew. And aside, the late summer before this, I had 4 bushels of apples that were too old to eat but good for wildlife. My wife and I dragged them out near the stand and dumped them in a low spot. A couple weeks later, we walked out to look around. Every apple was gone. I was surprised. I'd done this before, and there's always some remaining on the ground. As we stood there looking, my wife says, "Look up," and was pointing in the trees. Red dotted the canopy. dozens and dozens of apples in the notches of tree limbs. They were all over. I've watched both red and gray squirrels try to move apples around many times. Smaller ones are no problem, but larger ones present a problem, especially to get them high into a tree. It's nearly impossible. Perhaps there's now an explanation for that. Also in baiting, I usually had 55-gallon drums of bait. I'd dig a pit, fill it with bait, then cut down trees or standing dead trees, stack them like Lincoln logs, pyramiding them upwards. I chose the heaviest I could find and had to move with a timberjack log roller and use all my strength and some levers to get them stacked. Idea being to make the bears work and stay there on the bait longer and keep scavengers out. Now I knew the bears could tear the structure open in time, but what always baffled me was when these logs were 25 to 50 feet away, laying on top of the underbrush, as if they were thrown from up high. Moving them across the ground is one thing, but throwing them is quite another. And why? Why not just expose the bait and eat, as if they were angry the bait was covered? I think I know what was going on, but I digress. This happened about 75 feet from my stand. I thought I didn't want to get down onto the ground, but I had to and quickly made my way back to the trailer. I didn't see any tracks in the snow. My brain was buzzing, my adrenaline was flowing. All the windows in the trailer have curtains, but I never used them. That evening, I closed them. It was cold outside. The wet snow had frozen. And in the center of the trailer's long back wall is a furnace, then a window, and then a futon. I grabbed a book, a weapon, a flashlight, laid down to read. A short time later, it was like a gigantic hockey player hip-checked the back corner of the trailer. The whole trailer shook laterally. I've never experienced an earthquake, but I considered that. Then I hear heavy, slow, thudding, crunching footsteps, and I could feel them bipedal. But as if they started by the heater, not the back of the trailer. In what was wet snow now frozen. Should have heard them at least several minutes earlier in the crunchy snow that had fallen while I was in the stand. My head was at the window edge of the wall. The crunching stopped right there. Again, immediately adjacent to my head. How did whatever it was know my head was right there? The curtain was closed. Totally unnerved then, again, because my head was right where whatever this was had stopped. It was definitely messing with me. I grabbed my weapon and waited. I yelled, "Whoever is out there, identify yourself right now. Messing with me like this could cost you your life. Who are you? I'll shoot you through the wall." I heard 2 more steps and thought, I've had enough. I'm not waiting for something to happen. I'll make it happen. With weapon in hand, I grabbed the flashlight, ran outside to the end of the trailer in the dark in the direction of the steps. Nothing. No crunching in the snow, nor in the trees, no eye shine, no conclusive prints in the snow. It was too frozen. There's a 15-foot wide path behind the trailer before the tree line, so we can drive around the trailer. Whatever it was didn't just step behind a tree in the dark. Back then I was cheetah fast. No way these experiencers were humans or animals. Neither moves invisibly and silently at times and loudly at others. And they can't just disappear. Those experiences immersed me into the Sasquatch lore. Holy shit, no doubt. 11 years later, I'm still searching for an explanation, but I already know what it was, what it really was in my soul, because the only large animal that I know of that could possibly be in that area that screams like that is a cougar. I've heard them several times out west. I've listened to every big cat vocalization I can find and every other North American animal, and it just does not fit. Not the same. And I would have seen it. None of these sounds are anywhere close enough. The fact that I could see where the sound was coming from and there was nothing there. Rules out. Rules all of these out. And as I did look up into the trees as well, having worked in the southwest and west, I know how big cats operate. Something tried to mimic a deer, but then went rogue. I was thinking Sasquatch at that point because of what it sounded like. When I got home, I thought, if they're a ghost, Hunting groups all over, perhaps there are Bigfoot groups, and sure enough, one in Minnesota. I contacted them with what I saw, and they replied and asked if would agree to be interviewed. Absolutely. A guy called me, gave his name, and said he was a wildlife biologist with the Minnesota DNR Forestry and working on his wildlife biology post-grad degree, and was doing work about 5 miles south of me and described his location. Later, I was able to verify that. I knew where that area was. Then he said he had seen some old gigantic tracks, and he had a sighting of a cryptid, and was investigating. And I was a bit taken aback at a scientist having a sighting of a, quote, cryptid, end quote, as he described it. We talked a bit. Long story short, he got busy apparently and never followed up further with me. And that was okay because just to hear he had a sighting so close was validation for me. The tree I had my experience while bear hunting in this 2 miles from this location and 4 miles from my cabin. I thought I needed more information, specifically height. I brought my wife up there the next weekend. It was cold and sunny, and the ground was snow-covered, as was the underbrush, and I told her I would walk her out to the spot where I saw it, and all she had to do was stand there at the aspen trees and raise her arms. We had two-way radios. She said, "Then what?" I said, "I'll be in the trailer watching and telling you what to do." She says, "So I'm going to be alone?" I said, "Yes, technically, but I'll be watching you." Boy, did I get the look. Prior to this, I hadn't taken into account that the trailer was raised 3 feet on blocks right there, and I was sitting about 24 inches off the floor in a chair. Then my eye level another 2 feet, so I sat down and waited. I couldn't see her. I called her and said, "Where are you?" She said, "Right where you left me." I said, "Raise both arms and wave them." She did, and I still couldn't see her. Surprised, I started to understand what was going on. I'm sitting up high, looking straight out at that height over the underbrush. I said, "Wait there." I took a roll of orange trail marking ribbon. I went to the woodpile and grabbed an 8-foot 2x4. I tied ribbon at the top, at the 7-foot mark, and the 6-foot mark. I brought it out and asked her to hold it. I went back and sat down, and I could see the top ribbon on the 2x4. But it was not high enough. I asked her to hold it to the tree and raise it, and when she got it to where I saw the thing appear to just get under a limb that was still there, I went out with the tape and took a measurement. 8'10". That, my friend, obviously rules out a human or an animal. October 14th, 2014, my son's cabin's built, mine is under construction, and I'm doing it myself. We did both cabins ourselves. I was still staying in the trailer house until my cabin was ready. I was up there working on it. I take a break for lunch as it was raining and had been all night and all day. I just walked in and was preparing lunch. At that time, there was a pile of firewood on the tree line, 4 feet wide, 5 foot high, 10 feet long. I glanced out the same window. At the left end of the wood pile closest to me, I see movement. At first glance, I think it's a deer, and I look away, but immediately I realize, it's not, and I look back. It's the color of moss and vegetation in a cedar swamp, and looked as if it was draped with moss. I could see the rear half of it from the mid-abdomen area. I could not see a head, tail, or front half. The top of the rear hip is level with the top of the wood pile. Taller than a world record whitetail. Still thinking it's a quadruped, but it looks deformed. It is moving very slowly as if grazing, or perhaps is bent over to avoid detection by me to get behind the wood pile. I just walked from the yard to the trailer, and had I been checking my 6 effectively at the tree line, I would have seen it upright, or at least perhaps all of it. As it goes behind the wood pile, I realize it's not a quadruped. It's a bipedal bent. It is a biped. Bent over 90 degrees. First leg joint, the knee in front like a human. That's why it looks so strange. I quickly moved 8 feet to the right to the next window to see it come out from the other side of the wood pile. It did not reappear. I said, not this time. I bolted outside of the woodpile like a cheetah, maybe 15 seconds from my last sight of it, and it was gone. It could only have gone south toward the pond, otherwise it would have been in the yard with me. And as fast as I got there, I was thinking, I'm going to run right into it physically. Then what? Mid-October, 95% of the leaves are down up there, and I can see through the woods to the pond, and there was nothing. No crashing, no breaking brush, no splashing, and no sighting of it, or anything moving. I thought there must be tracks here. Water was ponding on the ground. It had rained so much. I was soaked already, so I dropped to my knees and was crawling and feeling the ground where I saw it for depressions or feet of any kind. Nothing. No tracks. That thing had just vaporized into thin air. Said hundreds of people. Thousands, probably. 2016, my wife and I were preparing to leave the cabin on a Sunday afternoon in late spring. We were in a hurry. My wife has a phobia with frogs. Wonderful seeing as we have a large wetland. Spring frogs' hatches had been drowning out all other sounds all weekend, day and night. I locked up the cabin and came out to see her staring toward the back of the cabin at the beaver pond direction, and I asked what she was looking at, and she asked, "What is that sound?" I listened, and it was fairly close and loud. I noticed no frogs croaking at all. The only sound was this weird noise. It was similar to, but not exactly the same as, the deep guttural panting, but with a strange disturbing rhythm. And it was as if it was directed to where we were standing, if that makes any sense at all. I moved slowly toward the back of the cabin, scanning the pond edges where I could see. Again, I could see the source location, but nothing was there. It continued, and something didn't feel right, and we left. I've never heard that since. I had a 10-foot by 20-foot deck on the front of my cabin, and in the fall of 2021, I decided to timber frame an enclosed porch on the deck. I was a couple of days into it as I stood on the deck putting up some wall framing. I had my back to the trailer, the yard, and to my son's cabin, and of course I was alone. It was a warm, beautiful, sunny day. Before I was even conscious of it, I felt it. There was someone behind me staring at me, but I was alone. I turned around, and as I scanned the area, about 12 feet from me at the end of the trailer house was what I described as a shimmer. It was about 12 foot by 12 foot, like a sheet, and shimmering. I could see through it, but not clearly like glass, more like water with ripples. It had a defined edge. I clearly felt a consciousness about it. I felt it was standing there looking at me, thinking, waiting for something. I wasn't fearful. I didn't feel threatened. I felt consciousness so clearly that I mentally tried to project a thought of, who are you? What do you want? A couple of minutes into that, it was gone instantly and simultaneously reappeared 80 feet away and just past my son's cabin, and to the right of it, with no lapse in time. Movement from one spot to another was simultaneous. Then a minute later, it moves to the trail opening and is instantly gone. When I see it, I feel my mind's eye sensing consciousness. Like it's not just there randomly, but it's conscious. And I am there also, and it knows I know it is there. Why did it let me see it? It could have chosen invisibility and stood there for hours undetected. Was it assessing me for threat or possible abduction? What if I hadn't turned around when I did? My cabin yard and surrounding woods have game cameras all over. Not for Sasquatch, but for security. They went up when we started building up there over a decade ago. At one point, we had over 30,000 in building material under tarps. Over a dozen cameras, give or take, depending on equipment failures and equipment swaps. This past late fall, early winter, my wife and I were there. We had 2 plastic resin Adirondack chairs, excuse me, and plastic resin small table between the chairs around the large fire pit. We left them there and returned a couple of weeks later. The chairs were where we left them. The table was dead center in the fire pit upright. Well, of course, the wind blew it there. The wind blew the table off the ground 5 feet away over the 1-foot-high wall of rocks on the top of the pit. Not catching a leg on a rock. The landing as it was sitting on the grass upright dead center, and the wind blew the table without moving either chair. Those chairs blow over all the time. From the chairs, I thought I could see depressions in the turf 18 to 20 inches long, moving towards the tree line, but not clear enough to be conclusive of anything. I didn't try to pick them up in the trees as they dead-ended in the yard. I had 2 cameras looking toward the fire pit in direct line sight of it. Nothing on the camera cards, nothing triggered the motion. I tested the cameras and the cards, and they work. So now we need to pull the other cards to see if any camera picked up anything unusual or a person messing with me, and they did not. These cameras catch snow falling off the steel roofs and shadows and leaves blowing. So why not a table flying through the air? Impossible? No. Improbable? Absolutely. Chairs should have easily blown over too. Chairs and table were inches apart. At the cabin at random times, as recent as 3 weeks ago, I'll hear what sounds like voices in the distance, a conversation, but it's gibberish to me. The volume differs, and when I think it's loud enough for me to make out what's being said, I can't. Sounds like gibberish. At the cabin, there's no one near enough for me to hear their voices. In fact, the only time I can hear this, it is gibberish. Early last spring, leaves are budding. I was in my kitchen in the cabin. I walked by a window that looks at my son's cabin. I stopped abruptly, backed up. I saw someone at the tree line. I stared at it. It was my granddaughter. She's 13, tall, skinny, long, dark blonde hair, standing against a tree looking at me. At 80 feet, I swear eyes met. I moved to the next window for a different view. There she was. Back and forth, and she's there each time. Then suddenly gone. I can't see her or anything like her or anyone else. My son and family are living in Florida. He's on a work contract. Then I think did something happen to her and she's dead? I immediately called my son to check and he said she's fine. I said, put her on. He did, and I spoke to her. And since then, every time I pass that window, I look there, nothing even close to resembling what I saw. Shape-shifting? Did something try to lure me to the tree line? What if I had gone out to investigate? 4 weeks ago, first week of October, I was up there alone. It was dusk. I was going to make some supper, and suddenly wanted to go for a walk. Huh? At dusk? Yep, so I did, unarmed. I'm never unarmed up there, but there I went down the trail towards my stand. The end of the trail tees to the east and to the west. The west goes to the pond, the east into the heavy timber to my stand. At the tee, I suddenly thought, what the F am I doing? I go back. What the F am I doing? Go back. And I did. Pilatus preaches personal locator beacons are similar. I do not yet have one. Preaches personal locator beacons are similar. I do not yet have one. If I leave the yard, I text my wife and leave a note on the table where I'm going, the route I'll take, and exactly when I'll be back. Her instructions are, if she does not hear from me at that time, notify our son because he knows the exact lay of the land, and then the sheriff. I didn't even do that. I do not understand what happened there. I'm going to end this now. There have been all too often tree knocks, stones thrown, tree falls way out in the woods, and then moments later, another at the opposite end of the property, and there's zero wind. One perhaps, but two close together in occurrence, but hundreds of yards apart, large branches crackling and falling, and on it goes. Steve, I'm so glad I found your channel. Thank you for what you do, and please keep doing it. Stay safe out there, my friend. Mike, did you say to use your name? Well, that was a long one. Did you say use your name? You're welcome to use my name. Okay, Mike Sweeney. Holy shit. Appreciate that one. That's one of the longer ones we've ever read, but you put us right there with your mystery. I think you about covered everything that anybody ever writes in about. Not absolutely, but pretty damn close, right? Minnesota. Wow. What's going on? Imagine all the people that think these things are just an animal that likes to fetch a stick and hump your leg and make a nest. Then they hear an honest testimony from a good honest soul like you. What does that do to their brain? Right? Everything you mentioned here in this email has been mentioned from hundreds of people. I guess you can safely say now around the globe. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think of that testimony? What are the going to be details in there your brain just does not want to accept that happened to this man and many other people? Why is that, right? Anyway, man, I got to get going. Keep us updated on your journey. Man, you got a lot of stuff going on there. Holy cow. Non-stop, right? There's so much in that email. I don't even know where. What do I say? What do I have to say about that? Does it even matter what I got to say? Just take it all in. Keep the wheels turning, right? Keep the wheels turning. But it's testimonies like Mike's and thousands of others that tell me flat out, we're not dealing with a full-time animal. Not that that's been a mystery for me for a long time. It's just, why doesn't everybody climb onto the eyewitnesses and keep moving forward instead of staying stuck back there, man? Holy shit. Come on, you guys. Not everybody, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of people out there that just can't do it. They willfully stop their brains at a certain point in this journey. Why? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, I gotta move. Man, is it raining? Holy shit. Share my story at howtohunt.com. Get us your truth, all right? Get it out. Get it shared no matter what. It's the safe place to do it. Please, please share your truth, all right? Whatever you know, whatever you got, share it. You're going to help somebody, all right? Later.